Yeah, JD and I met, was it 12 years ago? I was thinking 10, but I'm not going to get too much into our story because I think he's going to tell you more about it next week. But we met in college down in BG. We were both dating girls that are not our wives now, thank God. Those girls happened to be roommates. We met because their connection. We lost touch for a while after we both ended those relationships, and it wasn't until about 5 years ago, my wife and I got married. We bought a house in Toledo, and I saw JD had a Instagram post in Toledo, and I was like, that's weird. I'm going to message him. So I said, hey, where are you at? I see you're in Toledo. He's like, oh, I'm over right across from Toledo Christian. I was like, that's weird. My wife and I just bought a house by Toledo Christian. So we ended up buying a house 4 minutes away from JD and Chelsea. And since then, our families have felt intertwined. And realistically, my wife and I have been in this church, give or take, for about that long. But we've been in and out. And it took me contending for my faith to be here. So that's why I'm super excited about this book, the book of Jude, and what we've titled this teaching, this series, as Contend. We're going to look through Jude. I'm going to start verses 1 through 3, just the introduction today. And I'm super excited about it because it's challenging. So I hope you're challenged. I hope you feel God pressing on your heart somewhere. I know he will. That's who he is. But I hope that's my hope for you today, is that as we work through Jude, what it means to contend, that you will. And I hope that you learn that God's idea of contending is different than our own. Deal? Cool. JD prayed for this. I was going to do it, but he's taken care of that already. So we'll just roll through here. My notes don't want to come up. That would be bad. All right. Second slide, please. So I figured before we get rolling, maybe, we're going to define contend, because I think it's important that we know what it means to contend if that's what we're going to try and do. So, slide number 2. There we go. Contend, to strive or vie in contest or rivalry for, to maintain or assert, to face, to grapple with, to resist, to withstand. I think it's so important that we understand that the idea of contend means that there's something we're contending with. We're not alone. There is something that we have to fight against, and that's the whole idea of contending, right? This isn't just us. This isn't us rolling through the world as we see fit, but there is an opposition. There is something that we are contending with. So with that being said, let's get into Jude. Before I do that, I forgot. At the end of this, you're going to have an opportunity. I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask me questions about anything or comment on anything you see up here. I think that that's super important that you guys feel engaged in this because it's tough. So you've all got pencils in front of you or pens somewhere in there, and I think you got a handout on your way in. Write down questions. If you have questions as I'm speaking, write them down, and let's talk about them at the end. We may do it all together, or you can do it on your own if you don't feel comfortable, whatever it is. But I want you to be prepared that you're going to have an opportunity to engage with this at the end of the teaching. Sound good? Okay, cool. So Jude, beginning of Jude says, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James, to those who have been called, who are loved by God the Father and kept by Jesus Christ, mercy, peace, and love be yours in abundance. Okay, so this is verses 1 and 2, and I love it. I spent all week kind of wrestling through this, and I think if you're anything like me, when we start reading a book in the Bible, the first 2 verses, we're like, okay, introduction, cool. Now what are you really trying to say, God? Yes, anyone else? It's not just me, cool. But I want to sit in here for a minute because I think these 2 verses are so rich. They're so rich, and I'm so excited for them. So, first thing we've got, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ. Okay, Jude is a servant, and that word is doulos in Greek. I think I got it underlined and up there for you. D-O-U-L-O-S, doulos. I'm sorry to admit this to you guys, but English is a pretty barbarian language, and we don't get a lot of context cues from our language. But when it comes to Greek, there's richness, right? So doulos actually means slave or enslaved. So Jude's writing this and saying that I'm not a servant. I think sometimes we hear servant and we're like, yeah, that's someone who serves, you know. You might think of like your waitress as a servant. Not that much, but they serve you, right? That's not what Jude's talking about here. He's saying, I am a slave to Jesus Christ. I am enslaved to him. And we think of slavery as a bad thing because we think of the punishment and the evils that come from one person controlling another. But when we think about this from a good God's perspective, a God who wants to love us and care for us and give us good gifts, right? The idea of slavery or enslavement to that God is actually a good thing, right? And that's where we're going in this. And I want to point that out, that servant is a richer word. It's slave, right? We are slaves to Jesus. And I think when we ruminate on that, it changes our perspective, and I hope it does. It's enriched mine, and I hope it'll enrich yours. And then he goes on and he says, and a brother of James. Anyone know who James is? Who? Jesus' brother. Is that interesting to anyone? Jude, a brother of James. Who's James? So who's Jude? Jesus' brother. Jude very easily could have written here, servant of Jesus Christ and his brother. But he doesn't, does he? He writes a brother of James. All right, and this leads me to point number 1. I've got 3 points for you. Point number 1 is this. We have to keep things in order. We have to keep things in order. Jude recognizes his order in all of this is as a servant and as someone on the bottom of the list. He doesn't place himself higher. He doesn't expect more or do anything above and beyond. He realizes that he's a slave. He's at the bottom of the barrel. And I think this is really cool. I think this is really cool for us to remember that we have to keep things in perspective. But it's scary. And I told you, it's going to challenge you because it challenged me. What does that mean to keep things in order? It means that I'm not actually in control of my life. It's not even mine to live. I'm not the main actor in this play. Neither are you. That's scary. If you're like me, my flesh is like, nope, no way. I don't want to hear that. Because our culture says it's all about you. It's about what you think, what you feel, what you like, what you don't like. That's what we think you should live in. And Jude's saying, no. No, it's not. It's about God. It's about Jesus and what he's done. And that is the order that we have to live in. So point number 1 for you, keep things in order. Understand that you have a huge role to play. It's not passive, but we are not the main storyline. We get to be a part of the main storyline, but the main storyline is Jesus. And that's what Jude's pointing to here in the very beginning. Again, I told you, we skim over this, and we go, oh, cool, we're done with the intro. That's 1 point from the first verse, and it gets better. So he goes on and he says, to those who have been called, who are loved by God the Father and kept by Jesus Christ. Mercy, peace, and love be yours in abundance. We'll get to that in a minute. To those who have been called, who are loved by God the Father and kept by Jesus Christ. You can go one more here. I told you that English is a very barbarian language, right? It doesn't change. Go back one. Oh, did I skip that part? See, that's why I need my notes. My notes aren't up here. Going back a step. Brother of James, if you feel like, I don't like how I feel, my flesh feels when I think about being a servant or putting myself in order, right? You don't have to feel alone or like that's weird or anything like that, because if we look in John, that's my next slide actually. Go ahead. In John, Jesus is out doing miracles and things like that, and his brothers say to him, no one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world. And it goes on to say, John goes on to say, for even his own brothers did not believe him. Who's his brother? James and Jude. So Jude, this author of this New Testament book, right? Someone who's gone down in history as a scripturally based teacher for all of us. Even he didn't believe. So there's hope for you. There's hope for me, right? Don't feel like you're stuck in a place where just because you're struggling or you might not know or you might not believe quite yet, that it's over. Right? We see from Jude here that there's hope. That's what I wanted to touch on there. But moving forward, we move on, and he goes, God the Father. Now I think you can go to the next slide. We'll get into the language bit of this. And I apologize. I went to Bowling Green to be a teacher, history teacher. English was not I am not an English guy. I almost failed high school because senior year I didn't pass an English class, or I was about to not. Whole different story. But English is not something I'm well versed in. And this verse right here, to those who have been called, who are loved by God the Father and kept by Jesus Christ. Those two words, loved and kept, in the Greek, I thought about writing them up there, but I couldn't pronounce them for you anyway, so I didn't. Those two words actually mean having been loved, having been kept. And I think that I've struggled with this all week. I know there's a really big difference there. Versus God loved you, or to whom he loved, to whom he kept, and to whom having been kept by God, having been loved by God, there's a big difference. And maybe this illustration will help you like it helped me. That verb, or that type of word is a verb, but it's a perfect passive participle. Perfect passive participle. Tell you what, perfect passive participle, basically what it means is that it's a verb describing something that happened to a noun in the past. Okay? So our English language doesn't do a great job of this. So here we go. Here's my example for you. We have I swam. Okay, I swam. I can swim, or I am swimming, or something like that. But we don't know if it's present or current or future, or I can swim, I swim. We have I swam, or he swam. Did he swim away? Is he still swimming? Do you know? He swam. He swam that way. He swam earlier today. We don't know the context that's still happening. So this perfect present participle, or perfect passive participle, is this. And hopefully you get my illustration here. Is he swam id. He swam id. What it means is that that's something that happened in the past is done. It's completed. It's been finished. And when we think about he loved, he kept in that idea, we have to recognize that God's love for us, God's ability to keep us, is done. It's finished. Which leads to point number 2. We have to trust in God's finished work. We have to trust in God's finished work. Okay? If I know that those things are finished, and there's a tension there because they're finished, but they're still happening because God is outside of time. Right? We know that God is before, during, and after. He is always there. So those things are happening now, but the reality is they're finished. What we get to play with, the tension we get to live in, is how we respond to those truths. How do we respond to the fact that God has loved me fully already? God has kept me for him fully already. I have an option. I have a choice of how I respond to that truth, do I not? Now you see where we're going with contend. Right? God's love is perfect. God's keeping is perfect. He is a good God. But our job is to trust in his good work. Okay? Point number 2, trust in his good work. Let's see where we go next. It's just as much a mystery for you as it is for me at this point. Let's go one more. Yeah, so that leads to the end of Jude's introduction. He says, mercy, peace, and love be yours in abundance. And I've ruminated on this verse for a bit now, and I keep getting pulled back to the idea, to those who have been called. And I think about who's called? Okay, everyone, right? Everyone. And I think sometimes when we read the introduction of a Bible or chapter or book or whatever it is, we skim over it and we see it's those who have been called. We go, yes, that's me, right? Or maybe not. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're not in that place in your life. And I'd invite you as we continue down this path that you explore that. But I think Jude's talking to everyone. This opportunity is available for everyone. To those who have been called, who are loved, right? There's no difference here. Those who are called are loved. So even if you haven't accepted the gift yet, God loves you. God is keeping you if you haven't accepted it. That part's not up for debate. And I think that's really cool and encouraging. He goes and he says, mercy, peace, and love be yours in abundance. Mercy, love, and peace are simply fruit of the Spirit. Right? As you trust, as you keep things in order, as you believe that these things are true and accept them and move towards them, here's what will come. Mercy, love, and peace. And the word is, I don't know why I use this Bible. There's so much better. It says, will multiply. In abundance is will multiply, right? Not just like, oh, you're going to have a lot of it. It's like, no, it's going to multiply over and over and over again. So that's the first two verses of Jude. I don't know about you, but it's tough. It's tough, right? Keeping things in order. I'm not the main character. It's hard. And trusting in God's finished work. It's hard. It's hard for me. Okay? Let's see what he says. Jude goes on, and this is where he starts his letter. He says, dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt I had to write to you and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to the saints. Again, dear friends, our language is just barbaric. Dear friends is beloved. Beloved. Isn't that such a better word? Who in my life, who in our lives, who in your life is beloved? Who would you write to and say, beloved? The ones that I have deep, deep affection for. That's who Jude's writing to, right? And these are his brothers and sisters in Christ. He says, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share. So he's like, look, I have this really, really good news, and I know you guys know it. We share it. I have to write about something else. But I'm going to break here. I want to talk about what that good news is. Anyone else get offended at the word salvation? You don't get offended at the word salvation? The word salvation means that you need to be saved. Isn't that offensive to you? You can't do it yourself. I can't do it myself. In order to have salvation, we have to recognize that we can't do it. And I tell you what, that's offensive. To us, to our flesh, and to the modern world that says, if you just try hard enough, if you just work a little bit harder, you just do the right things, you're good. God loves everyone, you're good. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible talks about salvation. Salvation means being saved. Like you're lost on a stranded island. You have no hope. Someone has to rescue you from there. That's salvation, right? So the reality of this salvation is that we are all lost and fallen from a good and holy God. We're out of relationship. And there's no way, like salvation points to, that we can get back into that relationship on our own. Doesn't matter how hard we try, how good we are, whatever it is, that salvation is not ours. We cannot earn it. And that stinks. But the good news that Jude wants to talk about is the fact that Jesus Christ, who is God, came down, lived on this earth, lived a perfect life to die for the sins, for the brokenness between me and God. And if I accept that gift, the reality and trust that what God says he did on that cross counts for me, that's salvation. You may never have heard of this. Maybe you've heard it a bunch. I think it's always good when we get the chance to talk about grace and salvation that we live in it, because that is how we understand and grow in our faith, right? So that's why I'm here. We're talking about salvation because it matters. Once we have that salvation, life changes. It's a gift that costs us everything. And as we truly understand salvation and grace, we move. Our lives change. Not because we're trying. A lot of times we're not. But it's because we were keeping things in order, and we're trusting that work on the cross did what it was supposed to. Right? Points 1 and 2. Keep things in order. Trust in God's finished work. And he goes on here and he says, I felt I had to write to you, to urge you to contend. That's where this whole topic comes from. Contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to the saints. Contend. Let's see, what do I have? Yeah, see, I got salvation. Sorry, we can go one more, I think. Oh, see? Told you. I'm just going to be surprised as you are when these slides pop up here. So I had a video. Probably you guys more than... Who's on Instagram? I'm on Instagram. I got to try and stop. Oh, yeah, because you guys are all taking a break. Anyways, there's this guy on Instagram who does these videos of what it's like being rich versus what it's like being really rich. Okay, and we have this kind of arrogant, kind of pump up, shoulders up, nose out kind of view of this person who's rich. And he's just very rude to people. He's very like, I know everything, I'm the best, this and that. And we have that compared with his friend who's really rich, right? So we're talking about like $25 million versus this guy who's like a billionaire, right? And the contrast we see is that there's a humility from the really rich guy. Because once you get enough, you don't have to prove anything in the worldly sense. If I have $1 million, like, yes, but I got to keep going. When I get to, I don't know, for me, $1 million would probably be enough. But when I get to like 500 million, $1 billion, 2 billion, if I were Jeff Bezos, what would I do? I don't know. But you'd have to think that there would be a sense of, I don't have to strive to prove myself or to prove my value or my worth anymore because I have enough, right? Well, I wanted to show you a video, but that's the best I can tell you about it. But what I really resonate with that video, and I hope you do too, is this next piece here, is that that's where Jude's writing from. This world says, you can be rich. You can earn it. You can do all these things, and we can prop ourselves up and feel really good. But we're always running this rat race of trying to prove ourselves, trying to show that we're worth it, right? But what goes back to point number 1, how do we place ourselves in the role of a servant, is we have to understand our true worth and our true value, right? And I think nothing points to that better than this. Mark 8, 36 and 37, which is a verse that is very close to me. It's tattooed on my wrist. I was 18 and trying to follow God, but not really knowing much, and I went home and heard a teaching, and it was on Mark 8, 36 and 37. And I felt moved to just go and put that on my body so I'd always remember it. So as I was doing this was probably one of the last things I put in here, but this verse came to my mind. It says, and what do we benefit? What do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than your own soul? Is there? I don't think so. That's wealth. Understanding that your soul is saved, that your soul is taken care of, that is wealth. And when we recognize our wealth, we're able to put ourselves in a position of humility and serve. Say what again, Jake? I know. When we recognize the wealth we have in Christ and the salvation we're offered, it allows us to place ourselves in a position of humility and be a slave of Christ. If we're still chasing and running and trying to earn it, we can't. We can't keep things in order because we got to earn it. So he goes on. Where are we now? Felt the urge. We're not even to contend yet. I felt I had to write to you and urge you to contend. Okay, and again, contend, I gave you the definitions in the beginning: to struggle, to fight for, to do all of that. This word in Greek is epiagonismia. My wife pronounced it first time way better than I, and I tried to remember, but I can't. Molly, say it. Oh, now she's nervous. Agonizima, that was it, right? Agonizima. to agonize. And the epi, that's at the beginning of this word, is to mean earnestly. Like, fight with everything you have. Agonize earnestly for this faith. And what is this faith? This faith is that what Christ did on the cross is for me. It pays my sin, and because of that, now I have a right standing with God. And I get to be in relationship with him. And it allows me to start placing myself in a proper position to hear from him. And we get into this contend idea. And I think our world says when it comes to contending, like it does with wealth, is we've got to earn it. You got to fight. We've got to see it. We've got to push for it. It's got to be something evident to everyone around you, right? That's what contend is. It's fighting. It's fighting against something else. How else do I know if you're contending if I don't see it? We worry about that. That's not the contending that God's after. I told you we've been in and out of here for, 4 or 5 years, JD? And about 6-7 months ago, it was the middle of summer, and JD and I have been talking about just kind of things, and I just felt like I had to be here. I had to commit. That's the only reason I'm here today. That's it. That's the only reason we have a home church, my wife and I. Because out of the summer, out of the lake place Molly's parents have, out of the fun that happens in the summer on the water and in the sun and all of that, the vacation every weekend, I felt God calling me to be here. And my friends, that is contending. God is calling you. He's nudging you. He's whispering you to you, probably right now, for something. Call someone. Move towards someone. Give something up. Do something. God is calling each and every one of us. It might be to let him in. If you've never done that before, I pray you would. But I know that there's something in your heart right now that God's calling you to. Each and every one of you, just like he is mine. That is what we contend for the faith with. That is how we contend for the faith. You have to be willing to place yourself in the proper position as a servant and trust that God's will, God's finished work is good. And when you do those two things, it gives you the ability to hear God and respond and say, God, I really want to be at the lake this weekend. I really want to be out in the sun. I want to go to the boat. I know it'll make my wife happy. I know it'll make my in-laws happy. But I'm going to be here. I'm going to give up that thing that I want to be here for you. I don't know why. I'm not sure what you're leading me to, God. But I trust that it's good. See how all of this works together. We got to be in the right position. We got to place ourselves at the bottom. We got to trust that God is good and his work is finished. And now, our job is to respond. Our job's not to earn anything or to prove anything or to be here because it looks good to everyone else. Show how good of a Christian I am. Our job is to listen and respond. It's that simple. He goes on, for the faith that was once for all entrusted to the saints. And I just want to touch on this before I get to the opposition. That once for all in there, I ruminated on that a bit too. It's not like once for everyone. It's like once for this point in time, this salvation was made available. This faith was made available. So the idea there is that when God died on the cross, when Jesus died on the cross, that faith was made available to anyone who would believe. So I just ask that if you're in a position where you haven't done that yet, I know I've done it before, but that's my heart. If you haven't heard this message of salvation, if you're not sure about God, you can come see me after and we can start a relationship about what that means and what it looks like. But that's the best gift. And at one point in time on that cross, that salvation was made available to you. It's your job. It's your opportunity. It's not even your job. It's your opportunity of how you respond to that. And God's not going to make you do it. But he wants you to. And I think so do I. I know so do I. And he says at the end, he says, all entrusted to the saints. And I think sometimes saints is a scary word because it's like, ooh, the saints, those really, really good Christians, right? And that's not what that word means. Saints is hagios. I don't know if I put it up there. Hagious, hagios. Probably butchered the spelling because I'm not Greek. But it means to those who are set apart. That's it. To those who are set apart for God. Those who have received this message, those are the saints. And I'm here to contend with you that if you've received this salvation, that's you. You are these saints that are being written to right now. And I just hope that this moves you, okay? And as we kind of look into this, I started this that in order to contend, we have to recognize that there's opposition. We're not contending against nothing. It's not contending. In order to contend, you have to fight against an opponent or someone who's opposing you, right? So there is opposition in this world, and it's everywhere. It's outside. It's culture. It's the news. It's my friends. It's this, and I have to contend with that. But I think it's bigger than that, too. And I think if we're honest, at least for me, that opposition is me. That opposition is inside of my heart that I have to contend against. Right? Even just with my example of being at the lake. That wasn't outside opposition. I mean, yeah, my in-laws, my wife, a little bit of outside. But I wanted to be at the lake. I had to contend to be here. That's not outside opposition. That's from me. Right? Look, we become Christians, and it's not like a switch where it's like, all right, I'm perfect now. I don't ever have to worry about anything. No, I think the bigger reality is when we become Christians, when we accept this gift of salvation, there's a target. There's a target that gets placed on our backs, and we have to contend. Because if I'm just doing what the world expects me to do, I'm comfortable, I'm cruising through life, I'm doing whatever it is that I feel like doing, much like how JD and I lived in college. What am I contending for? Am I contending at all? I'm just being. It's not contending. There's no opposition. Right? So, let's see, where am I at? I'm close, right, JD? 45 minutes? Look at that. I know. All right, I think we've got a conclusion coming up here. Yeah. I told you I have 3 points, right? We have keep things in order, trust in God's finished work. And the last one, I guess I didn't make clear enough, but I'll make it now, is that we have to oppose the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance, there is no contending in. So we have to oppose that. We have to listen very carefully for what it is God's calling us to. Maybe for me and my wife, it's not sitting on the couch at 7 o'clock and watching videos or TV till we fall asleep. There's no resistance for us to do that. It's easy. It's easy for me. I don't know about you guys. But we have to contend. We have to oppose against that. We have to listen and say, okay, God, what is it you want us to do with this time? It matters. So, 3 points, right? Here's the first one. One more time. Keep things in order. Like Jude did, we have to recognize that this story isn't about us. This story is about Jesus. We get to play an awesome role in the truth and reality of eternity. You have a role to play in the people's lives around you for their eternity. When I say that you're not the main character, it's true. But you're a co-star. You're very important to the role of people in your life. And God wants you to move to those around you. So point number 1, keep things in order. And I want to ask you a question before we move on to point number 2 is, you don't really need to answer this, but what does it look like for things not to be in order in your life? What does it look like for you to be at the top of that list? When Jude says, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ, a brother of James. What does it look like for you to say, me, Colin, that's it. I'm the most important. I think there are answers to how we can contend and how you answer that in your own heart. Where are you placing yourself higher up? And where can you place yourself more as a servant, as a slave? Question number 2, or point number 2 is trusting God's finished work. It's hard. What is faith? What is faith if we're not doing that? I heard a story once about, maybe it wasn't a story, it was an analogy. Is that the right one? Someone describing something with something else? It says you can go to Niagara Falls and you see someone there with a wheelbarrow and a tightrope across Niagara Falls. You can see him go back and forth across the rope all day. You can believe they can do it because you've seen it, right? Would you get in the wheelbarrow? That's faith. There's a difference between believing and faith, right? So faith means something, and faith is hard for us because, again, we're fallen people. We want to be number one in our stories. We want it to be about us. And I have to trust that God's work is what saves me. It's not mine. I have to trust that. So again, question number 2 with this is, what does it look like for you not to trust God in his finished work? What areas of your life are you still trying to earn God's love or his salvation or salvation in general? I'm a big believer that those answers, I got one more question for you still, but the answers to those questions in your own heart is God speaking to you. That's Jesus telling you, hey, I just want you to move in this direction. Do you trust me enough to believe that this is me? And then the last point, okay, oppose the path of least resistance. I can tell you from experience that the path of least resistance is easy. And it's nice, but the kingdom doesn't move. God doesn't grow us. God doesn't use us. God doesn't affect the world around us when we sit in the path of least resistance. So again, question number 3. How are you living in the path of least resistance? And I'll leave you with God for that one.